In this video, we're going to try and put some of these pieces together, and we're going to create a page that is going to utilize our dog object. So I've already got this created for this example, and we're going to go into Bootstrap and pull in Bootstrap's cards and use the cards to render our dog objects. So we're going to put several ideas together here, and then we're going to end off with something called event emitters, which we'll just see what those do towards the end of this video. So right off the bat then, I've already linked up my CDN to Vue, and I've linked up, I thought I did my Bootstrap one, so I did not. We'll do that together. And I'm assuming that I'm going to have some Bootstrap, so I put a container on here, and inside my Bootstrap container, I have my Vue instance that I've created, and then my very simple Vue instance that I created has the name of app. It has the fact that we are utilizing this ID app template, and the data properties that I have set up are page title, which is what I'm using to display the page title here on the page. And then I have a my dog array. My dog array is an array of dog objects that have some puppies in them, and if you look in the directory, I also have those puppies inside the same directory. So the first thing then to do, if this is a bootstrappy thing, is to go over to Bootstrap and get that CDN. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to link to just the basic CSS. I'm not going to do anything with the JavaScript, so that's all I need there. And right off the bat then, my component should look different. There we go. My title should look different. All right, so we can even put that in H1. I guess that'll make it look a little nicer. Not really where the point of this video is, but there it is. Okay. So, oh my, very nice. Okay, next thing I want to lead you to in Bootstrap is if we go to the Components menu item, and under Components, which is very aptly named, we've been talking about Vue components, haven't we? Well, it turns out that components isn't just a one thing for Vue, it is a commonality in programming. And so if I go to Card, and I'm going to click on Card then, we have probably been, or you have experienced using Bootstrap cards already. And if you look at the code for the Bootstrap card, you will notice that they call it a component, but not only as a component, it has a single root element, which is something we talked about in a prior video, that every component has to have a single root element, and then it can have nested elements inside of it. So, not coincidentally, the component, card component, has one element, and then nested elements, a root element. So I'm going to copy that and come back to my page here, and we're going to create a Vue component out of the card component. So I have these up and down on top of each other. I usually have them side by side in the videos, but I'm hoping it'll be a little bit easier to see when we're doing it top and bottom here. So remember, we're doing a Vue component, and I'm going to call this component doggy cards, or doggy cards, I don't know, doggy cards. And then we put our template. And remember that the backticks are our best friend here, so that we can put things on multiple lines. And so I can just go ahead and type in or paste in all of the bootstrapped card component. And then I kind of lost some of the indenting here. But let's see what I can do to kind of give that as a better visual. There we go. And so now I have a card component called doggy cards. And if I just go ahead and put that component here in my Vue instance template, I have doggy cards, and my doggy cards, as I was worried about that, I was typing this. One, sometimes casing is a issue in Vue, so if we need to make this all lowercase, so I'm going to come back in here to my, we're going to make that all lowercase, and then that should work. All right, weird, right? I know. Anyway, so all lowercase, and now we have a card that we're going to want to utilize for our dog objects down here below. All right, so we've learned before that we can loop through our arrays utilizing our templates, or if you didn't remember, we're going to do it now. So I'm going to do a v-4 directive equals, and then I'm going to use the word dog in dogs, meaning that view can loop through all of my dog array items, and each time it loops through the array, it's going to put my dog object into dog. So the first iteration is going to print out a doggy card that basically has access to this first object, dog object, and then of course the second dog object. So let's just get 2 cards showing, and then we'll start off simply here. And remember that we can put something in here that would be, I'm going to say dog dot, let's do something simple for now, title. And so remember that if we want to put something in between our component markup, then we'll come into our component markup, and where we want that information, let's see, we're going to put that here in card title. Remember, one way that we could do it is using slot, which I'm not going to keep, but I'm just going to demonstrate that it is a thing. So now we can see that each component is getting the individual titles of our elements. All right. The other way, and the way I'd prefer to do it, is not using slots. It was just for a demonstration. Is not to use slots, but we're going to v-bind. In other words, let's erase this here. So I wanted to use v-bind, v-bind, and I want to bind something from my view instance into a property of my components. So we've seen this before, and hopefully this is a review. So if not, here we go. So in my component, I'm going to create what's called props, and I'm going to create a prop called title. And the idea is that my component is expecting to see from the outside world an attribute called title. Again, a reminder that the props all have to be lowercase or it won't work. And so what we're doing here is we're saying I'm going to link or tie together whatever is the value in, and we need to put that in here now, v-bind title. So v-bind title, which is our prop name here, binds to the component's property called title, and we're going to bind the dog.title. In other words, we're looping through dog, and so we're going to bind dog.title. And so we're doing the same thing that we've done here before, except that it didn't work. So let me figure out what I did that didn't work. So if I come into my inspect element, let's see if I can get some information as to what I have done wrong. And there's no information there. So let's look at our view instance. And our view instance is saying that, oh, I know what I didn't do. So here what I'm doing is verifying, well, the component did get the dog 1. So, and this component did get the dog 2. But what I didn't do was in my template say, okay, now that you've got title, where does it go? So let's put it again in here. So title. All right. There we go. Now let's see if that works. Bingo. All right, so now we've got v-bind. So remember that v-bind gives us a way to link information from our view instance into our component. So if for some reason, and I'll just demonstrate this, if something in, well, let's do that later. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. This seems like a good place to go for the short run. All right, so continuing on with this thought, if I wanted to, it looks like in my card, I also have an image, and I also have, so I have an image here that I'm going to want to bind to my object, and I also have some text that I want to bind to my object. All right, well, that's awesome. So I could do a v-bind title just like we just did, and the image and the text, but that seems like a lot of extra work. Why don't I create in my component the ability to receive the whole dog object? So instead of just receiving a string, let's have you send over, you being the view instance, why don't you give me an object instead? And so if I have this whole object in my hand, me being the component, then I could do something a little bit more like here. I could put in dog obj dot, what did we put, text. So, and then I could put in, remember that if you're using the attribute, you can't just put in something in curly braces here. You're going to have to do v-bind, v-bind. So v-bind gives us the ability to send data from the view instance from the parent into the child. It is also how we bind, I did this wrong while I was talking, vbind source. It's also how we bind data properties to an attribute. So vbind, and then we would do, we've got that object dog obj, and its property is image. So if I look down here, it's image. So now we need to, instead of vbinding title equals, and I'll leave that there since we already had it wired up, but you have for visual. So now we're going to do vbind, let me put a space there for visual, vbind, we want to get to the property. I know there's a lot going on here. Vbind to this property, vbind to dog, where did it go? Vbind dog obj equals to the view instance, which is now dog. Remember, each time we go through this iteration, we're getting an object put into dog. And so vbind equals dog. So now we've bound the entire object. Every time we loop through this doggy cards, we're getting a dog object, and we're going to bind the dog object into the property of the component. All right, so let's see if that works. And again, I got an error message, so what have I done wrong? So my dog object is getting in the information that it requires. And if I'm looking at my, looks like I spelled dog, dob. Let's try a dog, and let's see what we get there. Dog obj. Let's see. Vbind image, dog obj, right. So let's see what we get there. Okay, there we go. Guess you have to spell correctly. That's a theme, isn't it? All right, so now I've got my individual data coming in to each of these components. So yay. All right, so the next thing we're going to tackle is this button. So let's use this button to keep track of individual clicks from each individual component. And then we will use our event emitter, whatever that means, to keep a running total at the very top of both clicks. So individual clicks per component, and then the cumulative clicks and the above the components, the culmination of the two. So let's start with the easy one. So we're going to go to this button, and it is in our template here. And it is set up as an A tag. That's fine, you can do that. I'm just going to make mine a button. Button doesn't really matter, that's an HTML-y thing. Okay, so I'm going to make mine a button. It has the class button primary, so it's still going to look the same, so that's not going to change anything. Remember that we can do a v-on click, which says listen for a click on this button, and then we're going to run a function that I'm going to create called button clicked. Remember, you can also do an @ symbol if that's easier. @ click equals button. So that's doing the same thing. So we need to create this function. I'm going to copy it so I don't try to fat finger things. And within the component then, I'm going to add a comma and methods, which is an object of functions. And we have a button clicked. And so I need to have a property that is going to, not a property, but an instance method. Properties come from outside. So I need a instance data property that I can update to keep track of things on this component. And we did that by using the word data again, but remember, components need to have unique copies of those data properties. So we had to create a function that returned an object of the properties that we want to use. In this case, I want to use clicked. And then we're going to initialize it to 0 and then put a comma. So several things to remember here. First of all, if you put this curly brace on the next line, it won't work. It's a view thing. I don't know why. I just know it doesn't. And remember that if you're going to utilize this to keep track of clicks or as an accumulator or it's something you're going to want to update at another point in time, you're going to want to initialize it. And so the idea here is that when we click on this button, this function is going to get fired and we're going to update clicked. So in order to get at this component's data properties, we use the word this dot clicked plus plus equal semicolon there, or no semicolon, whichever, optional. So now if we're going to do that, we need a place to display it. So inside of my template then, I'm going to create a paragraph that's going to display my components, my individual components clicked. Now I got more indenting problems than I was interested in. There we go, clicked, and then make sure you end the p tag. All right, so now let's see what we've got. So I do have in fact 0 showing up on both of these, which was what we initialized the click to. When I click on the button, 1 is updating, 0 is not here, so that's looking like it's working properly. All right, perfect. All right, so the next step then is to have our accumulator that's showing maybe at the top of the page that in this case would show 8, or is our total a number of clicks. So just for fun, I think I'm going to come into Bootstrap and I'm going to look at some different components, and there's a badge that I think might be fun here. If I scroll down enough, I think it would be pretty neat if I had something like this to demonstrate my clicks. So I'm going to highlight button, and I think just for good practice, I'm going to make a new, and close this up a little bit for some real estate, I'm going to create a new component out of that. So I'm going to call a new component. We're going to call this badge. And then it needs an object and it needs a template. I'm going to use backticks. And inside those backticks, I'm going to paste in that badge. Okay. Perfect. Indenting looks awful, but okay. There we go. A little bit of something there. Okay. So if we look at the template, then let's go ahead and just put it in here. So I'm going to put it underneath my H1. I'm going to put, we called it badge, and it doesn't have anything in it yet. So let's just see what happens. Okay. So apparently it didn't like something I did. How unusual. That never comes up for you, does it? Oh, I didn't put a comma here. I didn't put a comma in between my component name, my component ID, and my object of components properties. And so let's see what happens now. Yay! All right, and now we have our little badge thing. All right, so in my view instance then, I'm going to create a property. I'm going to call it click total. I'm going to initialize it to 0. And then in my template, I'm going to copy that so I have the correct spelling. In my template then, I want to put, that's not the right template. Instead of 9 then, I'm going to put in click total. Okay, and then I don't need the word profile. Let's do clicked. Okay, so now let's refresh, and I've got an error. Who would have guessed that? So property method click total is not defined. So click total is there, and click total, oh, right. Kirsten, hello. Good example. I mean, I did this on purpose. So remember that if I created this data property is in my view instance, my root directory, my root instance, let's call it that. So we do not have access as the component on purpose. Remember that it has to be standalone, so we don't have access to click total. So we can, and what I'm going to do then is create a prop, and I'm going to call that props click total. So now this will work, but I have to send that information from the view instance into the component. And remember to do that here in the HTML markup for my component. I'll type in vbind and then vbind to my property click total, which cannot be capitalized. They have to all be lowercase, otherwise it won't work. So just thought of that. So we'll make that lowercase. And then, where was I? Okay, equals, and the instance's name is click with a capital total. All right, so now let's see what happens. And now we get an error message. And let's see if I can determine what my problem is now. I'm missing a colon. Oh, here's my same problem. I do this every time. No, I thought that I had done this incorrectly here, so I did not. Property ID, so vbind, this needs to be a dash, not a semicolon. All right, there's a lot of little things to keep track of, isn't there? So it's not just you, in case you're having trouble with it. So I guess maybe my errors are good so you can see them, me working through them, hopefully. And I must have done it someplace else. vbind click total equals click total. That is correct. App.js line 9, it's still unhappy with app.js.9. So yep, props should need a colon. There you go. All right, now let's see what happens. There we go. All right, so we're good there. All right, so just to make sure, I'm going to do app, because that's the name of my view instance, app dot, what is the name of that? Click total. Click total. Well, I can see that it's 0. And here's where the view binding comes, the vbind, app.click total equals, if I put 5, which is changing the value here on 5, because we're using vbind and this component is linked to this data property or variable, if you want to call it that, we should see it update in our view, in our web page, which is exactly what we've seen happen here. All right, so how then do we, where originally we had this function where when we clicked on a button here, our individual components property got incremented, but our view instance also needs to get updated. Well, one way we can do this is similar to what I just did down here. Not the most preferable way, but you can definitely do it. So in the function, let me raise this up so we can see these all together, or not. There we go. So in the function, remember this is the function that we created for this button click. It is in our component doggy cards definition. We have this method, and this is where we're updating our individual click. So one way that you can update the view instances click is you can do exactly what I just did in the console. You can do app.clickTotal ++, and that will work. So let's just prove that. All right, so I hold my breath now every time I do this on the example. So it is in fact updating. This is updating, 4 got updated, 3 + 1 is 4, so I know that that is working. But again, we're back to this idea that the component needs to be standalone. It can't bank on the fact that something exists outside of itself. And so this isn't necessarily the best way to do this. So I'm going to show you something else, which is what I alluded to at the beginning, and that is this thing called an event emitter. So we're going to do an event emitter next. And this gives us the ability to send data outside of our component to whoever it is that is the parent. So again, it's keeping ourselves self-contained. So that's what we're going to do next. All right, so in order to demonstrate this, I want to bring you back to this idea where this element is listening for a click event to happen in order to do something, right? So when the button, this element, hears a click event, it's going to run this function. And so what we're going to do is create that click event for someone to listen to and then run a function. What? Okay, so here's how this works. I'm going to come back into this method. And I'm going to do something we haven't done before where I'm going to write the word emit, E-M-I-T, has to use this $sign. So this is the exact word you need to use, $emit. And then I'm going to put in quotations, let's see, button click. So referring to this button being clicked. So you can call this whatever you want. So this would be synonymous with the word click, on click, or on butt click. So we're creating an event. So we're creating something someone can listen to. We're going to call it butt click. That might not have been such a good idea the way I say it. But anyway, let's go back into our element. So here's the element that's going to listen for that event. So we're creating the other end of things where before we say, and when something gets clicked, that there's an event that gets fired and we're going to listen for that. Well, here we're actually creating the event that gets fired. And so in our doggy cards element, we're going to listen for that event. So V on, instead of the word click, which was an event that someone else wrote for us to listen to, we wrote an event to listen to, and we called it, or I called it, butt click. All right. So V on butt click equals, and then you're going to write a function for that. I'm going to write button clicked because I think that seems a little bit more appropriate here. All right. So I'm going to listen for butt click, and when that happens, we're going to run a function that I'm going to write called button click. So in my view instance, I need to create a method, methods, which is an object of methods, and one of them is going to be button clicked. And for the moment, I'm just going to see if it works. Clicked. So let's see if it works first of all. So ideally then when I click on one of these buttons, it's going to fire off an event called butt clicked. This element is listening for that event to happen. When it hears it, it knows to go run this function, and we should get an alert. So let's see if that happens. Refresh my page, and I got an error. Emit is not defined. So, oh, I made a mistake. It is emit, but it has to be an emit on this component. So I can't just say emit. I have to say this emit. All right, now let's try that. So this emit, on this component, we're going to fire off an event. So let's see what happens. And that should have worked. So butt click is emitted, but the handler is registered for butt click. So I've done something wrong. Once again, let's verify what I've done. All right, so if I'm reading over this, it says event butt click is emitted, which is what we wanted happening in the component, but the handler is registered for butt click. So what got registered was, looks like I have a casing problem here. So we have the butt click and butt click. So let's clear that up. So we emitted a capital click, but we were looking for a lower click. So let's see what happens now. So now we've got a lower click, and we've got a lower click. So this emit butt click, V on butt click, run button clicked. All right, let's see if that works now. All right, so now we're getting our alert box. So that's good. That's what we intended. That was what my initial intention was. All right, perfect. So now, now that we have our function being run, I don't need to alert anymore. But I think the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to update the click total, because we know it got clicked, otherwise we wouldn't be in here. So this dot click total plus plus. All right, so if I save that and refresh, now we should see our click total getting updated, which it is. Perfect. All right, so not only can let's go back to my emitter. So not only can my emitter throw up a event, it can also send information. That's the second argument. So the second argument, let's do something simple like we'll do hello there, emitter, I don't know, event. Okay, so we're going to now not only create an event, but we're going to send a string along with that event. And if you do that, then when you go into your element and it's listening for that event to happen, it has to catch that extra argument. So I'm going to put a comma, and we have to use the word event. So $event grabs whatever got sent, And the next thing then is when this function runs, we have to catch that argument, right? So if we come into button clicked, and you can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it E. You can call it whatever you want. I'll do EV for event, EV. All right, so this is going to catch an event. So let's try to console log EV and see if we get that string. So I'm going to redo this, click on the button, and I am now getting that string. So now we're sending data to through our event emitter to our function that's catching that event. All right, so the last piece of this puzzle that I'm going to do then is kind of to tie some of these pieces together is if for some reason we want to change these dog images or change any of these properties, I'm going to change the dog image, but it doesn't really matter which one you want to do. You'll see why in a minute. So the idea then is somehow when I send this information from my emitter, so let's see, where am I trying to get you here? Right here. So what I'm thinking is instead of sending a string, if we send the entire dog object, because otherwise how are we going to know which dog object was being sent from this component? Well, we got the dog object originally. So I'm going to take that dog object, dog object, and I'm going to send it instead of just a plain old string. And so this is still catching the event. That's not going to change. But now the idea is once now I'm not getting a string here, I'm actually getting an object. So let's just verify that. And how could I have messed up something so simple? Line 25. Somehow here I messed up. Oh, where did I get that G? Okay, so save that and refresh. And now let's see, I'm going to click on, and dog obj is not defined. So I probably am missing the word this. So let's go back to this. And we'll refresh this. And now let's see what we got. And now we're getting that object, right? So I'm getting the unique individual object that got clicked on because I sent it back. And so the idea there is, last but not least, is now that I have that unique dog object, I can change any of those values. And by changing, let's see if I can help bring this home here. So now I've got this exact object that exists here in the view, or I've got this object. So now I have the ability to change each of these individual properties because I've got that unique object in my EV here. I got it sent back. And so now if I take EV dot, which is the dog object, and I'm going to change it to, I only have two objects with me. Well, let's do something else. Let's do text because that makes it more clear. So I'm going to do EV text equals it changed. And so the idea now is I'm changing literally the value that's in this object. And because we did the vbind text into our component should get updated as well because they're all bound together. So now let's see what happens. It changed. And then the same thing will happen here. It changed. And so remember that's synonymous with us saying app, if we change, let's say app.dogs of 1, and we change its title to something different like something different, remember that because we're changing the actual value here in the object, because we used vbind, remember when we took this and up here we did vbind our dog object, because those are now linked through vbind and through the property of the component, the actual code will change. So, oops, I didn't do this. I did something different, and now you can see something different coming through. So hopefully this is including the mistakes I made, very educational. Hopefully that helps kind of bring all of the pieces together that we've been working on the last 2 weeks, which ideally will assist you in your assignment for this week's module.